Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. I could not sleep. So I got up early. So I wanted to get the day off good with a video before I go to work. I think this is going to be a good one. At least it feels a good one. I feel good vibes from it. Democratic Party. I will be your confessor. I will be your priest. I will be the guy that you can whisper your sins to. Whisper those sins to me. Now here's the thing, before you start to whisper those sins, understand that the sins to which you are going to whisper to me, if you're being honest, are already very apparent. They're not obscured from view by screaming Russia. In fact, they're made all the more apparent by screaming Russia. It was Vladimir Putin. Putin did it. Those are not the sins I want to hear about. The test of existence is existence. Whether or not you're worthy, whether or not you're relevant, is your existence in and of itself. And let's be honest, you're losing relevance quickly. You spent $25 million on a guy who was trying to be a Republican, and he lost to the thing that he was trying to be. What do you want to do? What do you want to do? You want to be somebody else, or you want to be yourself? If you want to be yourself, there's room for you at this table. If you don't, we already have a Republican Party. Your failure, your existence itself, your lack thereof of existence in regards to political space is the test of your existence. Whether or not you should be is in some way determined by if you're here, if you are. And you're slowly losing, ebbing away. 66 out of 99 state legislatures are in Republican hands. That's amazing. That's terrifying. Those guys are maniacs. That's absolutely terrifying. The House, the Senate, the Supreme Court on a federal level are in Republican hands. That is terrifying. That's terrifying. You are so bad. You're so bad that a reality show host is our president. That's embarrassing. That's embarrassing. That's an immensely embarrassing failure. And yes, just because I'm saying I'm going to be your priest, I'm also going to be your prosecutor. I'm going to be all these things to you because those are the things that I am. I am the American voter. I'm the American voter. I'm the guy who looks out and see what your party does, what your party doesn't do, what your party talks about, what your party refuses to talk about, the state of this country, the state of this globe, the state of the ecology. I look at all these things and I ask, what does the Democratic Party do to address any of this stuff? Why is the Democratic Party failing on this level? And if the Democratic Party is the apparatus to deal with any of these issues that affect humanity, why aren't they? What's wrong with the party? What's wrong with the people who are at the helm of these parties? What is wrong? I'm looking for an autopsy. You're looking to blame something else. I'm looking for an autopsy. Confess. Confess. Confess you're cheating. Confess your sins. You know who's a good guy to talk about this? The guy who you marginalize, who you push to the side. The guy who is an actual advocate. The Batman of this narrative. Meaning, do you remember? And yeah, and this is a slight due to, but I love comics because I love the themes that come up in comic books. If you haven't noticed yet, in the movie, there's a guy who they want to have some level of esteem and everything else, and Batman makes the decision to take on all the garbage that this guy did. I will take their scorn. I will take the fact that they hate my guts because they think I did something that I didn't do. I will be Batman and take this on. I will be the Dark Knight. And Batman does that. He takes that on. Now, Ralph Nader is more epic because he took it on. He didn't have a choice but to take it on, but he took it on. And maybe you can say, okay, Batman is more epic because Batman had a choice. Fair enough. But he's still in the comparison with Batman, and that's more than most people. The point I'm getting at is, in the election that Al Gore lost that election on his own merits. He couldn't even win a state, but they blame Nader. They blame Nader. You had hundreds of thousands of Democrats who did not vote Democrat in Florida. You had a ton of African Americans, hundreds of thousands, if I'm not mistaken, that were kicked off the voter rolls in Florida. The Democratic Party didn't stand up for them. And yet they were shocked. They were shocked. They were aghast that Ralph Nader didn't just somehow magically disappear from the race. If I'm not mistaken, if Ralph Nader disappeared from that race, Al Gore would have lost worse in Florida. And yet, that's the guy they blamed. That's the guy they blame. The guy who was the actual advocate, who actually was passing legislation for the benefit of the American public, who represented the middle class as a soldier, unapologetically, unequivocally, in office. Now, he's not taking office, but he's working with the Democrats that were in office at the time to pass legislation for the American public. And he was immensely effective at it. Your seatbelts are credit to Ralph Nader. At some point, Nader is looking at this, and he's seeing a change. He's on the ground at eye level when it changes. And this man has commentary about what happened to the Democratic Party. And I would wager that if anybody is going to have a trial, Nader is going to take the stand. I want to hear what Nader has to say. Let's hear what Nader has to say. This is in the Intercept. All right. Let me get to I don't want to get to the top because it's a lot. Ralph Nader's long-winded. But I don't blame him for being long-winded. Sometimes it takes you a while to get to the shit that you're trying to actually say. But Ralph Nader, do you want me to go through the history and the decline and the decadence of the Democratic Party? I'm going to give you milestones around the Democratic Party neck that are milestones. Millstones around the Democratic Party neck that are milestones. The first big one was in 1979. Tony Coelho, who was a congressman from California, who ran the House Democratic California campaign treasure chest, convincing the Democrats that they should bid for corporate money, corporate PACs, and they should raise a lot of money, while leave it up to Republicans and simply rely on the dwindling labor union base for money when you had a huge honeypot in the corporate area. And they did. And I could see the difference almost immediately. First of all, they lost the election to Reagan, and they started getting weaker in the Congress. At that time in 1980, there were some big allies who were defeated in the so-called Reagan landslide against Carter. We lost to Senator Gaylord Nelson, Senator Magnuson, Senator Church, who had a lot more trouble getting congressional hearings of corporate malfeasance by the Democratic committee chairs. When Democrats regained the House in 92, you can see the difference in appointments to regulatory committees and agencies. The difficulties in getting them to upgrade health and safety regulations. Democrats were still thinking conservatives were dull, stupid, and humorless. They didn't adjust. And this is important. You need to understand what Ralph Nader means here. Ralph Nader is making the point that your language, what you can talk about, what you can say, and the things you don't say, those things are infinitely important if you're a politician and an agenda that you're trying to get accomplished. Sometimes the most important thing in the world is the thing that's not being said. And the fact that that thing is not being said is a problem. Now, in this particular case, Ralph Nader is making a point that what Democrats couldn't talk about was economics. It's the thing they couldn't talk about was the thing that they most needed to have the conversation about. And it's the thing that people cared most about, and it was off the table. That's what he's getting at. I'm giving you a lot of money. Shut the shit up about that economic stuff. I'm giving you a lot of money. Go out there and represent me. Be a talking box. Say what you need to say to get people to vote your way. But you better not say anything that would adversely affect my interests. And you will not do anything that would adversely affect my interests. Or you will not be getting the cash. Not just not be getting the cash. I would run people against you if you do so. It's not just about the money in that sense. It's also about I'm going to attack you with this cash. If you don't do my will, I'm going to put somebody in that box who will. Ralph Nader is making the point that I've made. Your strength in this is not in the money itself. Your strength in this is in people. You would never have the money. Your philosophical basis is not to have that cash. It's just not. Your philosophical basis is to represent the middle class and to get a huge amount of people to understand that you are the party that represents the middle class. The message is unequivocal. The message is untouched. It's like breathing. You know it. You don't have to be told. You know it. A Democrat's on the ballot. You know it. Do you honestly believe that's the situation to which we have? Do you believe that was the situation in FDR's day? The man won 3 times. Like, imagine the strength of that. Like, he's gone through a war and all this good stuff. Yes, you can get him credit for going through the war, but the main thing he did was, I'm going to give back to the people in this particular country, and they're going to know my name is FDR. Yes, I'm giving it a godlike ability because that's the way I think he was viewed. That's the way I think he viewed. There are going to be people who hated his guts. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. You build your audience. And I know that sounds weird. This is one of those James Baldwin things, where he makes this argument that you build your audience. You're not going to get everybody. There's no spectrum in which you're going to talk that you're going to get everybody. People have different realities. Those realities are going to see the things that you're saying and doing in a particular context, whether or not it affects their interests. Even sometimes it doesn't give a shit about the interests. They view it a particular way based on their lens. Your goal is not to get everybody. Fuck everybody. You have an audience. Live in that audience. If you're living in the right way, if you're doing things that are right, if you're trying to be an earnest and honorable man, I can live with that audience. And I'd wager that audience is the majority of the American public. When they're looking at a person, whether they are or not, they may just look at that guy and says, okay, this guy's earnest. He's being fair. If you're representing the middle class and the people know it, they see it in the things that you're doing and the policies that's being passed. They see it over and over, year after year after year after year. You have a Democrat on the ballot. You don't have to come out with a bold, new, sharp-edged strategy. They know it. They know it. They know it like breathing. They know it like air. They know it like water. That is not the situation to which you find yourself. And you're constantly in this struggle of trying to get across to people who you are. That wasn't a struggle you had in the 30s or 40s or 50s. It wasn't. Ralph Nader, increasingly, they begin to judge their challenge to Republicans by how much money they raised. You talk to Cadper from Cleveland, she says, we go into the Democratic caucus of the House. We go in talking money. We start talking money. We go out talking quotas for money. As a result, they took the economic issues off the table they used to win against again and again in the 30s, 40s for the Democrats. The labor issues, the living wage issues, the health insurance issues, pension issues. And that, of course, was a huge bonanza for the Republican Party because the Republican Party could not contend with economic issues. Think about it. That's common sense. You have one party who's philosophically there to represent the rich. Okay. You have another party who's philosophically there to represent everybody else. Now, if you were there to represent everybody else, what are the things that can come out of your mouth? Because who is your power base? Your power base is quote-unquote everybody else who's not rich, which is the majority of the country. Now, if that's your power base, what can come out of your mouth? Can you use words like the bourgeois, the elites, the billionaires, the plutocrats? Can you use those words? Yes, you can use those words. Those words will resonate with your base if your base is the majority of the American public. If Democrats represent the working class, why don't they use those words? Why can't they use those words? What is the problem with them using those words? Answer me that. Answer me that, Tom Perez. Answer me that. Bernie Sanders is sitting there. The billionaires are on our backs. The billions are on our backs. The Democratic Party needs to tell me what they represent. That's Sanders. What's coming out of your mouth? What's coming out of your mouth? Is that coming out of your mouth? And if that's not coming out of your mouth, why is that not coming out of your mouth? If you're supposed to represent working families, you're supposed to represent the working class. Identify the problem. That's not what you're doing. And if that's not what you're doing, that's a problem. Ralph Nader is making this point that the one edge that your party has, the one distinguishing characteristic that your party has from a philosophical basis is rich versus poor. We're representing the poor and middle class. You lost that plank. Meaning the moment that you lost that plank, the conversation you're having with Republicans is on identity. And guess what? I hate to say it, this is a racist country. Now, not overtly racist, not people aren't necessarily nice and kind and everything else, but those people do look at race in a heavy way, maybe subconsciously, whatever, however you want to put it. Because look, and I could be wrong on this. I look at the world from my own particular context, from my particular perspective as a man, as an African American, all those things, American, etc., etc., etc. However much I want to pull myself out of a particular context, I am trapped and stuck and inextricably bound to my context. Even when I try to step out of it, to some degree, I'm still in it. I can't get out that box. So when I look at that and say, why on earth are these people voting Republican? Why? Why do whites vote Republican? I don't understand it. You're voting for a party that's actively hurting you. Now, that question to me becomes less irrelevant if Democrats are talking about economics. If Democrats are having a conversation about economics, the question don't matter because it doesn't come up. We're not talking about identity anymore. We're talking about things that affect everybody. One unites, the other doesn't. You can understand the qualm, though. The moment that you took economics off the table, you're stuck in identity. That's a problem. That's not something you're just going to outright win. You may win at some point because the numbers may grow, but not now. You're not there. You're not there. And we're fortunate that you're not. If I'm being honest, we're fortunate that you're not. I don't want this thing where all these minorities vote Democrat just because they're Democrats. And Democrats escaped on the actual issues that affect those people. Those people may be scared of the Republican Party from an identity standpoint. Maybe they should be. But economics is the thing that gets you freedom. It really is. So if I need you to be scared for a little bit, I need you to be scared and be in the wilderness. I've heard people say that a lot of minorities feel differently. Those minorities are wrong. Yes, I'm saying it as an individual. I'm saying those people are wrong. Economics is the thing that matters, and economics is the thing that's going to transform your life. The other stuff is important. The other stuff happens through economics, not through any other matter. The Democratic Party is using you. They're using you. The thing that they need to be talking about is economics. Economics is a uniting force, and it's the thing that allows them to pass all that progressive legislation in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Ralph Nader continues. Increasingly, they begin to judge their challenge. I said that one. As a result, they took the economic issues off the table. They used to win again and again in the 30s and 40s for Democrats. The labor issues, the living wage issues, the health insurance issues, pension issues. And that, of course, was a huge bonanza for the Republican Party because the Republican Party cannot contend on economic issues. They contended on racial issues, on bigotry issues, and that's how they began to take control of the solid Democratic South after civil rights laws were passed. Raising money from Wall Street began in drug companies, from health insurance companies to energy companies to Democrats, kept Democrats from their main contrasting advantage over Republicans, which is, in FDR's parlance, the Democratic Party is the party of working families. Republicans are the party of the rich. That flipped it completely and left the Democrats extremely vulnerable. As a result, they drew back geographically to the East Coast and West Coast and so on. And that created another millstone. You don't run a 50-state presidential campaign if you run 50 state. Wait a minute. I need to stop right there for a moment. That made them They drew back geographically from East Coast and West Coast. Have you noticed that to some degree that creates a stigma in our society? It exacerbates race issues. It exacerbates it. The reason why I don't focus on identity politics, the reason why I despise identity politics with a passion, because the honest truth is, the honest, bare bones truth is, race and identity is the thing that's weaved over society to get them to not pay attention to the thing that matters. Economics. I, as a black person, as a Native American person, as whatever you want to call me, I don't need you to understand me. I don't need you to understand my pain. Leave me to my devices. Now, in leaving me to my devices, understand historical context and all this other good stuff. That's fine. But ultimately, don't fuck me in the polls. Understand that there was a certain history in this particular country when you make certain choices and decisions. But no, I don't necessarily need you to fully understand my experience. I don't need to fully understand yours. I need to understand that you're a person and you have the things that are associated with you being a person in this particular society on this particular planet. That's all I need to know. That's it. I'm okay with you being you. Be okay with me being me. Any society that you're trying to get to that have all of these different groups, you're going to have variances in that society. Your ability of tolerance of saying, I am okay with that person being that person, is paramount. You don't need to understand each and everything because you're not going to understand each and everything. The model itself of saying you need to understand the pain of X is insane. How many races? How many different cultures? How many of these things do we have on the planet Earth? And are you telling me you need to understand each and every one? No, you don't. Just leave people to their devices. Let people be who they are. That's my point. Any society where you're talking about this, somewhat you have self-actualized people who can say, okay, I want to be free. That requires a certain level of tolerance to allow other people to also be free. Let them be who they are. Let them be who they are. What I'm getting at is that Democrats created the schism of an identity by focusing on identity issues also. The moment that economics went off the table and identity became the big shit of conversation, now you have a divided country. You have a country with a very complex history that's focused on race and identity because the economics was taken off the table. As a result, they drew back geographically to the East and West Coast and so on. And that created another millstone. You don't run a 50-state presidential campaign. If you don't run a 50-state presidential campaign, number one, you're strengthening the opposition party in the states that you've abandoned. So they can take those states for granted and concentrate on the states that they grew or their gray area. That was flub number one. Flub number two is Ben Barnes, the political savvy guy in Texas, told me. He said, we don't contest the presidential race in Texas. It rots the whole party down. all the way down to the council. So it replicates the decadence and powerlessness in future years. He's trying to say that when you don't run in states that you don't believe you can win in, your apparatus, your party apparatus in those states dwindles to nothingness. You lose it all just by not trying to fight it. When they abandoned red states, they abandoned 5 states in the Rocky Mountain area and started out in a handicap in 9 or 10 senators. You remember from your history that 2 senators from Montana were Democrats. Church from Idaho was a Democrat. Frank Moss, consumer champion, Democrat from Utah. Now there's almost nobody. 2 senators from Wyoming are Republican. The 2 senators from Montana are Republican. John Tester and the Montana Senate is a Democrat. And 2 senators from Utah are Republican. This is getting into the weeds. So they never had a veto-proof majority, even at the peak in the Senate. And that, of course, later, they weren't at their peak. It cost them in the Senate again and again. Now they're in a whole huge hole. And a debacle in the Senate races. In 2016, they're facing 3 times as many Democrats up for re-election in 2018. This is the crux. This is the crux. Even though Democrats are at their weakest, in 2018, they have more seats up for grabs, meaning Republicans can make more ends. They can make more gains, meaning Democrats can get even weaker in the Senate. So much so they can lose their filibuster. If they lose their filibuster, the draws are off. Their draws are off. Chuck Schumer is getting bent over, and he's not going to be able to do anything about it. And yes, that's a pretty vulgar reference. Look, when we're playing chess in a barbershop, we say really bad shit to each other. We're guys. I'm unapologetically a guy in a sense. They're in bad straits. They're in bad straits. So the party that used to be the party for working families essentially laid down their guns and picked up flowers and said, we're going to talk about issues of identity and we're going to be peaceniks and we're going to try to accrue all these minorities to us. Fuck the economics. We're getting paid to not talk about those things. We're going to try to make this moral argument on identity. Guess what? People aren't buying your moral argument. Moral arguments, by definition, are difficult to run because it depends on the individual who's looking at it. Now, I often make moral arguments in the sense of this kind of utilitarianism. This, if you want a society that works, then yes, you're going to have to make certain concessions to make that society work. Any society works that way. But those aren't the arguments you're making. My argument, that basis of that particular argument structure is somewhat philosophical. But what I'm saying is absolutely true. Any society you have, you're going to have certain concessions. What are the concessions you're willing to make? I'm saying, starting off with this basis of cooperation is a better basis. You get a society that has people with their needs met. You get rid of many of these issues. But again, that's not the argument you're making. You're making this peacenik argument that's somewhat shallow. This idea of cosmopolitanism. This thing of everybody's just going to be peaceniks and everybody's going to get along. We're going to be fucking awesome together. Wait a minute. My freedom is determined by how much capital I have. You're not talking about economics. Economics is the thing that frees me, not this peacenik stuff. And you did it with a country that maybe has not moved as far as you think they've moved. Meaning, no, you're not getting that number of whites that you thought you were going to get. Ralph Nader's right. If Ralph Nader was your prosecutor and not me, you'd still be convicted. What I'm getting at is any new strategy that you come up with, it's going to be unbelieved. You've lost this idea that the people look at you as being the party of the middle class, of working class people. You've lost it. I don't think you realize the gravity of that loss. That's an immense loss. It's for people to go into and say the Democratic Party is the party of the working class and to know it like breathing. That's an amazing thing. That's an amazing, amazing thing. Think of the inevitability that was associated with Hillary Clinton. Now, granted, she wasn't inevitable. Clearly, she lost. I'm saying the perspective. The perspective allows you to hide dark things. That preacher, that pastor, that priest who I'm talking about was a pedophile. Well, many of those people were pedophiles. But the cloak allowed them to hide really dark things. The fact that you were the Democratic Party and you represented the working class, you could hide behind that for a while until people start saying, whoa, this isn't representing the working class. This isn't representing the working class at all. You created a problem for yourself. The issue that you need to talk about is economics. That's what it boils down to. The issue you need to talk about is economics. If you're not having that conversation, you're losing on the other conversations. I'll leave it at that. All right, guys. If you enjoyed the content, feel free to share, rate, subscribe. You can always support the work on Patreon or PayPal.